Hello, everybody, and welcome to Friday Live at 5. I'm Peter McLaughlin, BlueSky Hypnosis, and this is our weekly 5 o'clock live discussion about all topics that pertain to things on my channel, which would be hypnosis, hypnotherapy, meditation, past life regression, spiritual regression, how you can use hypnosis to improve your life in a whole variety of ways. And today we're doing the second of our spiritual film analyses. And this one, we're doing it on Somewhere in Time. Somewhere in Time is, I've decided, it's definitely my favorite movie. I'm almost 60 years old. I saw it for the first time in 1980 when it first came out. I was 18 years old, and I was completely blown away by this film. And it has never let me down. I think I've seen it probably a dozen times, including just a couple nights ago when I was sort of preparing my mind for today. And before we get into that, I just want to give my standard disclaimer. So if you have a medical issue, if you've got a serious psychological issue, obviously go see your doctor, go see your psychologist. I am a hypnotherapist and I'm a life coach. So everything I talk about is coming from the perspective of doing this work with clients one-on-one for the past 15 years. With all of that aside, let me talk about my other standard thing, which is if you've got suggestions, for future content, please feel free to share those, including other films that might be interesting to analyze. If you have questions, if you have comments today, please, 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 I heavily encourage you to make those comments, to make those suggestions, ask those questions, because that's really what makes this Friday Live what it is. It's way more interesting when it's interactive. So back to Somewhere in Time. Completely captivated by it at the age of 18, long before I had become a professional hypnotherapist, long before I even knew what past life regression was. And, you know, to come back to it years later and look at it through the lens of the kind of work I do, which is pretty heavy, honestly, with regression. So it could be present life regression, bringing a person back to an earlier point in their present life. In other words, where maybe a problem that they're suffering with now began. Or oftentimes, I'd say it's probably a good 75% of the time, the origin of a person's problem is actually in a past lifetime. So now to look at this film through these eyes is absolutely fascinating for me. And just a quick disclaimer, a spoiler alert, I guess we would call it. For those of you who haven't seen the film, if you don't want to know what the plot is, if you don't want to really know what happens, you may want to tune out right now, because I'm going to be talking about the plot. I'm going to be talking about what happens, because it's intrinsic to kind of looking at this through that spiritual lens. And maybe I'll just do a quick thumbnail for those of you who haven't seen it but aren't afraid to have the plot spoiled, if you will. So it's a really, really simple movie. It's a love story, and it takes place over two time periods. The movie was made in 1979, I think it was. So the movie takes place, there's a scene in 1972 when the movie begins. There's another scene sort of in contemporary times in the movie's terms, which is like 1979 or 1980. And then it takes place in 1912. The main character is played by Christopher Reeve. He had come to fame as Superman and was being offered all of these huge movie roles in action films and so forth. And that's really where actors, especially male actors, make all of their money. And Christopher Reeve seems like he was way more of a thoughtful kind of person, and he didn't want to get typecast as an action hero. And this movie only had a budget of $4 million, which even in those days was considered to be paltry. But he really wanted to do something different. And when he saw the script to this movie, he absolutely fell in love with it. And with accounts that I've read about him and interviews that I've watched, even to the end of his life, he really loved this film, which is very similar if you saw the earlier spiritual film analysis that we did of It's a Wonderful Life and Jimmy Stewart, and how Jimmy Stewart felt at the end of his long career about that film. And I have to believe that there's some aspect of the spiritual nature of these movies, the kind of universal truths, if you will, maybe even an insight or a window into our larger existence that I think really can touch the chord of the people who watch these films and the people who work on them, whether they're an actor in the film or whether they're working on the set. So Christopher Reeve decides to do this film. Jane Seymour plays his love interest, Elise McKenna, and she's the one who's basically existing as a young woman in 1912, while Richard Collier, played by Christopher Reeve, is existing as a young man in 1979, 1980. And he sees a photograph in a hotel called the Grand Hotel. It's on Mackinac Island in Michigan. And he's absolutely, totally, completely captivated by this photograph. He comes to realize, by a variety of methods, that he actually was at that hotel when this woman, this famous actress in 1912, happened to be at that hotel and performing at the hotel. And he decided that he had to go back and find her. That's the plot of this film. Now, interesting, at least for me, the method he uses to go back in time is literally hypnosis. So that tool or that vehicle is the same tool or vehicle that I use with my clients to help them regress, for example, to the origin of issues that they're dealing with today. It could be a medical issue, it could be a psychological issue, it could be a relationship issue, it could be something about money. And he convinces himself by using self-hypnosis that it is actually 1912 and that he's actually at this hotel where Elise McKenna is performing. And I'm not saying that when I do a past life regression with people that they have the same experience that Richard Collier had in this film Somewhere in Time, but it is similar. And I think it sort of, for me, it raises, and it has raised, the specter of what is real. So some of the critics of this film said, well, it was all just in Richard Collier's mind. He didn't really travel back to 1912. He just imagined it all. And over the years, I have come to define reality in a different way than I used to think about it. I used to think about it probably like most of us do, which is anything you can access with one of your 5 physical senses. If I can see it, it's real. If I can taste it, if I can touch it, if I can hear it, then I know that it's real. Well, most people would say that a dream that you have at night is not real, that it's only a dream. We even have that phrase. And yet, we've all had dreams whereby when we awoke from the dream, we would say to someone, maybe our partner or a family member, friend, or whatever, oh my God, it felt so real. Well, my definition of reality has changed to being not what's happening to your physical body. That's one version of reality. But the larger version of reality is your consciousness. And so unlike the time travel movies of, say, the 1950s, where someone actually gets into like a machine, some kind of contraption, and they set the dial to, it's June 17th, 1912, and then they push buttons and it makes these noises and things whir, and then their body is transported back to 1912. I don't think it's that. I think it's your consciousness. Where does your consciousness reside? So in terms of the constructed reality of the film, in my opinion, his body, his physical body, could have been lying in the bed of the Grand Hotel in 1980 the whole time. But as long as his consciousness is in 1912, he can really have that experience. And we know that when you have a vivid dream, for example, you can wake up with tears streaming down your face. Your pillow can be soaked from all of the crying that you did in your dream. Are those tears not real? So for me, my definition of reality is, where is your consciousness? Not exclusively, where is your body? And this explains to me why any one of us can time travel. Why we don't cease to exist when our physical body dies. People who have had near-death experiences come back, the ones that are revived, and 40% of them talk about this remarkable period of consciousness that they experienced while their physical body was dead. To me, you are your consciousness. Your body is like the car you drive around. It isn't you. It happens to be yours for now, and it allows you to do things that you can't do without it, but it doesn't define who you are. And to me, this is the key point in terms of how the movie actually works. And that is exactly how I would answer, a critic that would say, "Oh, he didn't really time travel. It was just all in his mind. It was all imagination." So let me see what we have in terms of comments, questions. I want to dive right into that if we have some of those already. Okay. So, hello, Mr. Mind Meditation. Good to see you here. Jasmine McMahon, welcome. Millie Cruz, good to see you here. Jill Turner, shout out to you, and you too, Estelle. Just looking, everybody's kind of checking in with each other, which is super cool. Barbara Shopper doll, I saw the same thing today. Christopher Plummer, there's only 4 main characters in this film. There's Richard Collier, who's played by Christopher Reeve. He's the male lead. There is the Jane Seymour character, the famous actress from 1912, Elise McKenna. And then there is a manager. So Elise McKenna has a manager who has taken her from sort of obscurity and invested his whole life, all of his hopes and dreams into her to bring her to this place of prominence and wants to see her keep going up, 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 up. And that character, the character's name is W.F. William Robinson, and is played by Christopher Plummer. And in a kind of strange coincidence, I guess you could say, the actor Christopher Plummer just passed away today at the age of 91, which is, I don't know, to me it's kind of remarkable. What a long life and what a storied career, but a really integral part of this film, and did such an amazing job in this movie. All 4 of the main actors really did such a great job, and I think that's one of the main reasons, one of, say, 2 or 3 main reasons why this film does so very, very well. Okay, so thanks, Barbara Shopper doll. Alexandra Carrion says, have not seen it ever, but I happened to research recently about ideas of best twin flame movies, and this is one on the list. We'll watch it soon. Yeah, I would highly, highly, highly recommend it. And I don't know whether Richard and Elise are twin flames, or maybe soulmates, or something else. I mean, I was kind of joking around with my wife yesterday and saying, I wonder what it would be like if we could follow, their lives. Let's say that they actually were able to get together and get married and buy a house and have children. What would things be like 5 years down the road? What would they be like 10 or 20 years down the road? There's so much magic, we all know, in this when you meet, the right person, or you meet a person and both people are completely, totally, and utterly in love. I think most of us have either experienced that or have a sense of what that's like. But what's it like 20 years afterwards? And I just think it's kind of funny to think about it. Who's cleaning, who's doing the dishes, who's paying the bills, what happens when the kids act up, and do they ever get any time alone anymore? So yeah, twin flame, very possible. Soulmate, possible as well. Could it be something else with that powerful attraction? Absolutely. Oh, and the backstory. And I didn't really know this until I did a whole bunch more research a couple of months ago on the making of the film, is that according to Jane Seymour, Christopher Reeve and Jane Seymour actually had a love affair while this film was being shot. And when I watched the interview of the director talking about casting, he first was talking about getting Christopher Reeve, which kind of blew everybody's mind, because they couldn't pay anyone anything more than probably Screen Actors Guild scale. People did it because they really wanted to do it. They couldn't put the actors up in fancy lodgings. Everyone had to kind of live together in the way you would do summer stock, which doesn't have a huge budget. And Jane Seymour was talking about in one of the interviews that I watched that she read, she and Christopher Reeve actually had a love affair on the set of this film, which kind of gets to what the director said about the casting, because all of these young actresses were coming in auditioning for the part. And two things. One was they asked all of these actresses, have you ever been in love before? And every single actress said yes, that she had been in love before, except Jane Seymour. And they thought that was kind of odd, but really, I guess, kind of mysterious and kind of intriguing. And what really sold the director and the producer on who to cast in the role of Elise McKenna was when they watched Christopher Reeve and Jane Seymour sitting together and talking. It was like instant chemistry. And I think that's kind of the most important aspect of this film. There's such a powerful bond between those two. And then to hear decades later her reveal that they had actually had a love affair while they were shooting this film makes absolute, total, and perfect sense. It makes absolute and perfect sense that the two of them would remain friends right up until the time that he died. And I think those are some other aspects of the magic. Well, it's magic, let's face it, it's magic when two people meet and there's that kind of spark, that kind of chemistry that just pops. And you can't really predict it. But everybody, you can feel it when you're in that situation, and you can see it when two people are in that place. And it's absolutely magic. And when you can capture that on film, which isn't often done, I think it really lends another level of, the only word I can think of is magic to what's occurring. That you're seeing not just two people pretending. They're not just acting. There is that deeper piece that's inside of it that we all want to feel, that we all want to feel. Okay, so Alexandra, you have to let us know what you think when you actually watch this. Jasmine from Australia, hello, and Leah Lang, cool. You haven't seen the movie either. Hopefully you'll watch it at some point too. Barbara Shopper Doll is saying there's a trailer for it on YouTube. Corey O'Neill, shout out to you. Just scrolling down. Legal Eagle is saying hard to follow you with the buffering. This happened 2 weeks ago. Don't know what's going on. I don't think it's an issue at this end because everything looks fine here. And the recording 2 weeks ago seemed like it worked out fine. So I'm sorry about that. Scroll down. Try to change your quality settings. Watch later without a lag, okay? So on Peter's end, lowest quality setting in the same. Who cares? He's amazing. Okay, I'm just scrolling down here, scrolling down here, scrolling down here. All right, so I talked about how hypnosis is the actual tool that is used for Richard Collier to go back to 1912. And the way he does this is that he dresses in period garb. He gets everything out of his hotel room that might remind him that he's in modern times. He gets period vintage money. He cuts his hair in a certain way. And then he just keeps repeating to himself over and over again that it's 1912. He's at this particular hotel. It's June. And that his mind accepts this perfectly and completely. And one of the things that I think is really interesting about this that I've mentioned on this channel before is that in 1979, weird, it was the same year that the movie was made, Harvard did a study where they put elderly men in a monastery in New Hampshire. And they mocked up the monastery to look like it was 20 years earlier, 1959. And they took baseline measurements of these elderly men. They put them into two groups. One group, they said, just exist in this monastery for 5 days. The other group, they said, pretend that it's 1959. And the researchers were astonished when these men came out of the monastery 5 days later at how youthful they were, how their baseline measurements on all of these different metrics had improved, like eyesight and physical strength and walking upright and the speed at which their fingernails were growing, and how their blood pressure had normalized. And it's amazing to me how powerful the mind is. If you really believed that you were going 68 years back in time, could you do it? I think you could. I actually think you could. And there's an aspect in this film when Richard Collier is at kind of the height of his joy with having found his love. And he stumbles across an object from modern times, and he's immediately brought back to the present. I also know that to be true. So for example, if you were to use hypnosis as anesthesia for, say, significant pain or even major surgery, which is possible, and the person's doing fine, no pain, no discomfort, and someone walks in the room and says, that looks like it must be painful, that person would pop directly out of this calm place and into a place of feeling and experiencing pain. So a lot of the hypnotic suggestions that Richard Collier was giving himself, and the concept itself, and the way he was kind of violently pulled out of that place, that all rings true to me. That all seems very, very, very true to me. Let's see here. Mr. Mind Meditation says, reality is a construct of how we see the personal world. You know, and there's another saying in the sort of self-help communities, especially in hypnosis, neurolinguistic programming: change your story, change your life. So as your mental story changes, I'm unlucky, I'm really smart, I'm not so smart, I do really well with the opposite sex, I don't do so well with the opposite sex, I'm gifted athletically, whatever it is going to dramatically affect how you interact with the world. So change your story, change your life. And a lot of the work that I do with clients is actually built around that. So, you know, a lot of what we've talked about in terms of him traveling back in time, imagination, what is reality, I suppose you could also talk about the placebo effect. If someone thinks they're taking powerful medicine, their chances of having incredible physiological responses to that medicine are very, very high. The placebo effect can be 33 to 70% of the effectiveness of any medication. And it's all happening here that translates into the body. I also would say about the film that, oh, and I wanted to pop up a picture of, not that one, that's the one I just had up there. Where is it? Somewhere in time. Here we go. These two. I talked about the kind of chemistry between Christopher Reeve and Jane Seymour. And if you haven't seen it, I'd love it if you watched it, and just tell me what you think about that chemistry. And if you have, give me a comment on it, on what you think about how the two of them interact with each other. Because, you know, again, to me, it's kind of over the top in terms of the sparks that are flying. And when I watched this film, it was so much different than the experience of watching It's a Wonderful Life in terms of looking for hidden subliminal directorial cues that would tend to influence how a viewer responds to the film. And if you're interested in that film analysis, if you haven't seen it, it's right here on the channel. I did it right around Christmas time. And there were lots of subliminal cues in that film. In this one, I didn't see so many. And what I saw watching it this last time was a really, really, really simple film. And when I asked myself of why it works, I would say the chemistry of the two leads, and then the director kind of did it very straightforward. And the director also paired past 1912 and present, and at the time that was 1979, 1980. And it was clear that he was making a really powerful statement between those two eras. So in the present, it's very mechanistic. There are, you know, television, radio is blaring. The first scene that you see in 1972, it's a cast party, and it's really, really loud. In one scene, there's trash rolling across a lawn. There's a ferry a motorized ferry going by. So things are kind of loud, they're kind of dirty. And when you're in 1912, there's a gauzy film over the lens. So everything is kind of a softer focus. Everything is much quieter. And then there's this other aspect, which is light, that I saw in this film. So when Richard Collier first encounters this photograph of Elise McKenna, it's in a room in the hotel, and it's called like the Hall of History. And as he walks over to this photograph, there's light coming in from a window, this bright, bright white light coming in from a window. So bright that as he walks through it, it kind of momentarily blinds him. It's so dazzling. And that light, that white light that we see when he first encounters her photograph, is a foreshadowing of the light that occurs at several other times in the film. So when they first kiss, that light is sort of shining on them. When Elise McKenna is on stage performing, like an actor in the spotlight, the same light is there. And then at the end of the film, when Richard Collier dies, and spoiler alert, I warned you guys, right? At the end of the film, when Richard Collier dies and he goes into the afterlife, and he meets her again in the afterlife, it's all this dazzling white color, or white light. And then everything fades to white. And I would say, if I had to say kind of what the theme is of this film, to me, the theme is coming home, is like searching for home, losing home, and then finding your way back. And for me, Richard Collier finds his way back home through his love for Elise. That essentially brings him back to the light. And on that same topic, they kind of have a date, Richard and Elise. It's kind of the only full day that they basically have together. And it's before her performance, and she has a couple of hours, and they spend this time together, and they're kind of wandering around the grounds of this beautiful hotel. The director of the film talked about how he was replicating impressionistic paintings with the tableau of what's going on. People are having, a picnic, and they're all dressed in their finery, and it's this beautiful June day. The sun is out, all the light is out. And at one point, they're in a boat together, and Richard Collier is rowing the boat, and Elise is sitting in the stern, and she's got her parasol, and there's a lighthouse. That's what this picture, kind of grainy picture of the lighthouse that's from the film. But if you think of the whole purpose of a lighthouse, that beacon of light can guide you back home. It's dark, and maybe it's stormy, and there's all of these troubles, and maybe you think you're not even going to make it. And you catch a glimpse of that light, and in that moment, when you see that light, that you're going to get home. And so for me, again, the theme of this film is finding your way back home. And I think that's how Richard does it. I think he sees the light in Elise. And even though she exists 68 years in the past, he finds a way back to her. And I guess the same is true for Elise, that she sees the light in Richard, and in her own way is instrumental in him being able to come back to the past and him being able to find her. All right, let's see if we've got any other comments on here. Here we go. It's Estelle. Kind of a weird question, but why do you think they couldn't be together? The ending made me sad. Also, how is it possible that the two timelines are connecting? Okay, Awesome question. Thank you so much for asking it. In quantum physics, and I'm not a quantum physicist, but my understanding of quantum physics is that time is an illusion. Time is not real at all. That everything is happening simultaneously. And that the reason why we as humans in physical bodies experience time is because we're on a planet that's rotating on its own axis, and it's circumventing or circumnavigating, I guess. It's going around the sun. And those two things create day and night and create the seasons. But just outside of that, there is no time. And so if we go back to what I said before about if you define reality about your body, you're going to have one way of thinking about this. If you define reality with your consciousness, you are basically always in the quantum field. There is no time. So when you, in quotes, go back to the past, you're not really going back to the past at all. It's happening right now. If you go forward into the future, you're not really going forward into the future. It's happening right now, that everything is happening simultaneously from a quantum perspective. So that would be my answer about how those two timelines can interact with each other. Now, the other thing you said, and I just want to go back to it here, is why do I think they couldn't be together? So I think they were together. So they definitely had time together in 1912, right? They had that day together. They had a night together. They had that reunion, and then they were back together. And then they were together in the afterlife. And if you think of our existence as multiple lifetimes, well, who knows how many other lifetimes they've lived together? And who knows how many lifetimes they will be together in the future? So I know that this is a really esoteric, that these are very esoteric concepts. I can't prove to you that what I'm saying is correct, but hopefully what I'm saying at least makes sense, whether you believe in it or not. And hopefully it at least partially answers your question. So thank you for asking that. I really appreciate the one on the timelines, because, you know, even when doing kind of therapeutic work with people, what happens is that something traumatic occurs in the past. Could be what we call a past life, or it could be something earlier in your present life. Well, in your mind, that trauma is still alive. It's like it didn't happen 5 years ago or 68 years ago. It's happening right now. And when you get triggered, you feel it like it's happening right now. And my approach, my theory, my practice on dealing with this is to take the person in their consciousness using hypnosis, go back to the past and heal that wound in the past where it lives. So your subconscious mind is now rewritten. The timeline, in a way, has been altered or changed. And so when you get triggered now in the present, you don't have the same reaction. You don't have the same response. So thank you, Estelle, for asking the question. I really appreciate it. All right. Here's Barbara Shopperdoll again, saying, I had an experience where I saw a picture of a man from the 1900s, and I knew him. Felt the connection that we had been lovers. But how? It was 2007. It opened me up to a journey of past lives. Yeah, that's really cool. There is a subscriber to my channel, and he wrote to me telling me he had an experience doing the past life regression on my channel. And if you haven't subscribed to it, I'm going to plug it. Please consider doing that. BlueSky Hypnosis. You'll get all the content that I put out, whether it's these lives or it's the sort of virtual hypnosis sessions that I have on there. And if you click the bell notification icon, in addition to subscribing, it'll tell you each time something comes out. He talked about doing this past life regression on my channel and seeing and experiencing himself as a British soldier in World War I. And he was one of these people that does, just wanted to do a tremendous amount of research because it felt so powerful and so real to him. And he found the real guy. He found his photograph, and all of the details that he had accessed in his past life regression were, according to him, consistent with what he actually learned about this man. So there's more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. So thanks, Barbara Shopper Doll. Here is Gia Girl. Hello, Gia Girl. The right person. Really? Well, why do people go from marriage to marriage or relationship to relationship? Is there such a thing as the one? Okay, so that's a great question and probably impossible to answer, but I can at least give you my opinion on it, which I love to do. I love to stand on a soapbox, a virtual soapbox, and give my opinion. Talked about the concept of twin flames came up earlier. I mentioned the concept of a soulmate, a right person. We'd first have to define what a right person is. And I think in a larger spiritual sense, a right person may actually be someone with whom you have conflict. So as I'm getting older, it used to be my belief. I had this belief somewhere inside that if I just met the right person, that we would get married, we would have kids, and everything would be more or less perfect. Yeah, sure, we'd have little issues here and there, but more or less everything would be great. And now what I believe is that, well, first of all, we know that one of the worst forms of torture is to isolate someone. To just put them by themselves is a horrible thing to do to a human being. One of the worst things you can do. Maybe the worst thing that you can do. And yet, being in relationship is where we suffer some of our greatest pain. I think that's how we really get hurt, actually, is in relationship. Well, why would this be? Why would it be that it would be worse than killing someone to isolate them? And why would it be that our greatest pain occurs in relationship? And obviously, our greatest joys come in relationship too. Well, what I think is that the pain that you experience in relationship isn't because the other person is a jackass. I mean, of course, there are some jackasses out there, but largely speaking, I think it takes two to tango. And that when we have pain in a relationship, what it's really doing is it's calling our attention to old wounds that we've been carrying around with us, that we brought into the relationship with us. And when we feel pain, in any context, I think, just my point of view, that it's an opportunity for us to go, oh, I have a wound. Where did I receive that wound, and what do I need to do to heal it so that I can be more whole? And I think in modern society especially, we've gotten to this place with divorce, for example, whereby we largely say that person's flawed. If they weren't flawed, I wouldn't have all of these issues and all this misery in my life. So if I just get rid of that person, then I'll be free of all of this misery. And now I can go out and get another person who won't be the same as the first person. And now I'll have that kind of, that thing I was talking about before, that everything is largely going to be great. Maybe a few issues here and there, but everything's going to be great. Well, is that their experience? No, usually not. Oftentimes they just keep repeating the same experience over and over again. Well, why would that be? Because they're still not getting to the deeper wound. The other person's just activating the wound. They're not creating the wound. This is just my theory, by the way, and I'm not saying it holds true with every person in every single circumstance, in every single situation. But that would be my way of answering that. You know, that I think, look, we admire people who climb to the top of Mount Everest. Is that easy? No, it's hard. That's why we admire it. And that pain and struggle, especially in relationships, and not in all relationships. I'm not saying divorce never makes sense. Sometimes it absolutely does. But even then, even in a divorce situation where you're like, that, I got to be away from that person's toxic, I still think it's important for us to look inside and go, did I play a role in that? And if so, do I have old pain and old trauma that I need to heal inside of me? Because if that's what it's calling us to do, and we don't do it, then why wouldn't we just keep repeating it over and over again? And if the society's telling us it's not you, it's them, then why wouldn't you want to just change them out? That would seem to make the most sense. And at least from a personal standpoint, I'm more on the side of, this is calling my attention to something. This pain, whether it was when I was diagnosed with leukemia, or if I have a problem in my relationship, or something else is going on, I'm first wanting to kind of get over my ego, which wants to say it's your fault, it's not mine. Go deeper inside, figure out where my wounds are, and do what I can to do to heal those wounds, and then bring a more whole version of me back to that relationship. So hopefully that makes sense. And thank you for asking the question. All right. So back to Geogirl. Right person then. It may not mean your life is a bed of roses with that person, but that person may, by being with that person, they may put you in a situation that will cause you to confront something that you otherwise wouldn't have confronted, and by so doing, resolve it. Right? Or so they could be a right person for a short period of time, maybe not for eternity. Anyway, thank you. Barbara Shopper Doll is talking about the end of Somewhere in Time and saying that's why I can't watch past the penny reveal, so the very end of the film, because it's just too painful. She cries too much. This, by the way, this photograph here is from the very end of the film. And it's interesting because we all see things and kind of take things in differently. And for me, it's like really beautiful and super hopeful. And it also, there's, for those of you that don't know kind of the backstory about Christopher Reeve, he was an amazing person. I mean, he not only, starred in Superman when he was in his 20s, and he'd been acting since he was 15 years old, but he played the piano beautifully, and he was a pilot. He had his own plane when they were filming on this Mackinac Island, and he would take Jane Seymour up in the plane when they had time off, and they would go off and have picnics in other places and do romantic things together. And he was also an accomplished equestrian, horse rider. And he had a horrible accident where the horse was, I think, balked going over a jump, and he was thrown from the horse and broke his back. Had a grievous spinal injury where he was paralyzed essentially from the head all the way down. And he was married to a woman named Dana, and she stayed with him all through this time when he was really trying to heal himself and get better. And it was just so ironic that the man who played Superman was now paralyzed. And then after he passed away, Dana Reeve, who was not an old person at the time, I don't know exactly how old she was, I want to say maybe around 42, perfectly healthy. She contracted some kind of cancer, and I think within 18 months she died. And it's hard not to imagine the ending scene of the film where now he is waiting for Dana as she passes over and they're reunited. So when I see the end of this film, I see it as incredibly beautiful. And in my understanding, for whatever that's worth, to me, that's a form of reality. When people have near-death experiences, they describe exactly this. If a man in his 70s passes away and his wife predeceased him, she doesn't appear to him when he dies as a 60 or 70-year-old person. She appears to him at a kind of golden age for the two of them. Like if they met in their 20s, for example, she would be in her 20s and so would he. And that's how they would reconnect with each other. Just like these two, Richard and Elise, connect at this kind of golden time for them. And so I think there is a lot of spiritual wisdom in this film. And I think, I see the ending as really hopeful, as really beautiful, and as I say, representing how I think it actually works. Because when you're defining reality primarily by your consciousness, you can be any age you want. You can be dressed any age you want. And if you're the first one to go, you would know that what this new soul who's crossing over would be most comfortable with would be this beautiful golden time when you first were together, this magical time. And if it were say a grandchild passing away, older, say an older person, and they're being greeted by a grandparent, well, that grandparent would probably greet them at a golden age in that relationship, which might be instead of 80 or 90 when they're hooked up to machines and in a hospital, it might be at the age of 60 or 65 when they're still energetic and kind of youthful, and when that person was a young child. So I get what you're saying. There's a lot of tears in this movie if it touches you. And that ending is certainly a place for people. It's not where my tears come from. I can tell you where mine come from. I noticed it just the other night when I was watching it. So Richard first encounters Elise in the photograph in this hall of history in the hotel with the light streaming down on it. And later in the film, there's a sequence where she's backstage, and they've got the old-fashioned photographer there with the boom and the big flash, and he's going to be taking her picture. And just as he's getting ready to take the picture, Richard walks into the area where the photograph is taking place backstage, kind of behind the camera, and she sees him, and the smile she gets on her face, the look she gets on her face when she sees him, is what's captured in the photograph. And the way she looked at him, that's where my tears started rolling. There's just something in the way she looks at him that's just so, to me, overwhelmingly powerful. And certainly not in a sad way, but in a I guess a kind of joyful longing or something. I don't know what it is, but there's quite a few moments in the film. All right. Here is Jill Turner, who is saying, I had a recurring dream for a couple of years, but recently it was so real, I cannot believe it when I wake up. Very unnerving. And I'm not sure exactly what TBH means. I should know that, but I don't. Anyway, yeah, I think most of us have had experiences where we wake up and it takes a few minutes, it takes a few seconds or a few minutes to realize that it was a dream because it felt so real. And who is to say, ladies and gentlemen, that when we die, we don't wake up from this dream, and go, oh my God, it seems so real. Walking around on that planet, blah, 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 stubbing my toe, and this happened to me in a relationship, and that happened to me, and that happened to my health, and I thought I died. Thank God it was only just a dream. So my current belief about what you're describing, Jill, is that it was real. That the dream was real. That we're in one version of reality right now, and your dream was in another version of reality. And both of them are real. And we know for a fact that if you have a dream where, as I said before, you're sobbing in your dream and you wake up and your pillow is wet from crying, well, those tears were real. And I don't think something fake actually creates something real. I think it has to be real to create real. And I would say the same for the placebo effect. The pill is inert, but the belief that it's powerful medicine is real. And so it creates a real experience inside of your body. Watching a movie that causes you to cry you enter into a reality while you're watching that movie that's a part of your mind is real. It's affecting you physiologically. It's affecting you emotionally. And I say it is real. I just have an expanded concept of reality. So thanks for sharing that, Jill. Can't wait to see the film now. Yeah, woohoo. Can't wait for you to see it too. Yeah, so Gia Girl is saying it happens in Hollywood when two actors are doing a movie about love or sex scenes, they connect. It helps to make it believable. For sure. And I can tell you as a former actor, it doesn't always happen that way. There are quite a few times where, you know, the actor in Christopher Reeve's case, if you're a really big star, you have some input over the casting. But there are plenty of times when the actors, you have no input over the casting whatsoever. And I've had times when I was doing love scenes and I was not attracted at all to the leading lady. And that presents a real challenge. You know, not only did we not have kind of magic and chemistry, but I just didn't have any, and you have to get past that. You have to learn, you know, how you can find this person attractive. And what I kind of learned was there's always something about another person that you can find attractive. It could be, you know, in this case, her teeth or her nose or her eyes or her hair or the way she smells or something else about her that you find attractive, even if you find the package not attractive. And you can focus in on that part and let that part fill you. But it's still not the same as if you have this primal, inexplicable, powerful pull towards each other, which is different than just being physically attractive. That's great. That's going to take you a certain distance. But when you have this other piece, wow, amazing. I was doing a play that my wife wrote actually a number of years ago. I want to say it was maybe like 10 or 12 years ago, called Our Finest Work. And it was about husband and wife whose 7 or 8-year-old boy, you learn as this one-act play goes along, dies. And my wife did not want to be in her own play, and so another woman was cast in that role, and we started rehearsing. And I was doing my best, and she was doing her best, and there wasn't any chemistry. It wasn't really happening. I could feel it. And so my wife stepped into that role, and as soon as she did, pow! Everything opened up. Everything just started to pop, and everything came together. And if the chemistry's not there, you're kind of doing the best you can. And if it is, like these two, I think that's unusual. I don't think it's unusual when two people are attracted to each other, but when two people have attraction plus whatever they had, oh man, all bets are off. So thanks for that comment. Michelle Hurst is saying it's one of my favorite movies. Yeah, absolutely. And Nita Mir is saying she's going to watch this soon. Cool. Mr. Mind Meditation is saying the mind is a powerful tool, use with caution. Yes, indeed. The 4 Agreements is a very famous book. And one of the 4 agreements, the subtitle is Ancient Toltec Wisdom, is to be impeccable with your word. And what he means by this is that the way you describe yourself, the way you describe your situations, the way you describe your relationships, the way you describe other people is powerfully influencing your mind. And so it's important to govern the input of what's going into your mind through your own thoughts, your own words, and then even what you watch and what you listen to. It's kind of as important, if not more so, than what you put in your mouth in terms of your diet. Thank you, Mr. Mind. Marie Hogan. Hello, Marie. She loved it too. She's saying, here's D from South Africa. I think it's all in the mind. 2 weeks ago, you spoke about the Hermetic principles. One of them is all is mind. Yeah, D, exactly. 100% correct. The very first principle is all is mind. Everything, animal, mineral, vegetable, the planet itself, all the planets, the satellites, the suns, the stars, the space itself, all is mind. Yeah, that's a really powerful way to bring that in, Dee, and to deploy that right now. I really appreciate that. Crazy question from Barbara Sharperdoll. I love saying that name, Barbara Sharperdoll. If your consciousness went back in time in meditation, if someone took a photo of you, say in a group, do you think you could show up in the actual photo in our present time? That's definitely part of the film, right? There's a not a photograph, but there's a moment in the film where Richard Collier is in modern time, and he's really trying to figure out what's going on. And he finds a guest registry book from 1912, and he scans down through the names that were signed in on that date, on and around that date, and he finds his name, Richard Collier, on that day at that time. So could you turn up in a photograph? I don't know. I don't know. My instinct is no, but I'm not exactly sure why. I think it's a great question, and it's really worth pondering. Really worth thinking about that one. Certainly. Okay, let's take it from this direction. So there's a boy. They wrote a book about him called Soul, S-O-U-L, Survivor. When he was really little, he was talking about being a fighter pilot in World War II. And he got all of these details correct about being this fighter pilot in World War II. Excuse me. He was so accurate that his surviving sister, 60, 70 years later, when she heard his story, when she met this little boy, she was so convinced that this was the reincarnated version of her brother that she gave this little boy all of her dead brothers, all of his personal effects from, as I say, 60 or 70 years earlier. Well, the dead fighter pilot was in photographs from that time. The present version of that person was different in facial structure and whatnot, but the soul or the consciousness was the same. So if you went back in time, you would probably be going back in your earlier, you definitely would be. You would definitely be going back in your earlier incarnated version. So could you turn up in a photograph of your earlier incarnated version? Absolutely. But it wouldn't be the way you look today in your present body in that photograph. Does that make sense? Kind of like that guy that I mentioned earlier that was the World War I soldier. He actually found photographs of his earlier incarnated version in World War I. So then you'd have to go a little deeper, and it might get a little confusing into the film and go, what was Richard doing? What was Richard Collier doing? Was he going back in time and inserting himself where he didn't previously exist into 1912? Or was Richard Collier in 1979, 1980, was his consciousness regressing, doing a past life regression, and going into his earlier incarnation, his earlier body? That's the one that you can do, as far as my experience suggests. Could you take your present body and go back at a different point in time? I have no way of being able to connect with that, because I've never done anything like that. I've read of stories where maybe people can do that, but I have no experience with that kind of thing. So long-winded answer, which I'm famous for, I think, of, yeah, you could be in a photograph, but it would be in your earlier body. Okay. True chemistry seems so rare these days. Are you talking about in film, or are you talking about just in general? In general, with people not being able to connect with each other very well, I could see that it would be harder, but I think there's always those people. And one of the things that actually